we're going to be walking through the introduction and the tutorial to Phantom Epoch, explaining the rules references as we encounter them. If you have a copy of Phantom Epoch yourself or are playing on the workshop, feel free to follow along. We're not going to be reading the narrative text, so you may want to pause the video at key points to read the text, and then rather than having to look up the rules in the rulebook, we're just going to be explaining them in this video. And we'll highlight some of the differences between the physical game and tabletop simulator as we reach them. So first of all, we're going to be setting up our campaign and our characters. So in order to do that, first of all, you need to decide how many characters you want. So if you're playing solo, the minimum number of characters is 2, so create 2 to 4 characters. If you're playing with a group, generally it's recommended each player just control 1 character, but if you're playing with 2 people, you may want to have 2 each. Once you've decided that, you go ahead and create your characters. So in Tabletop Simulator, we'll click this Create New Character button. We'll go ahead and name our characters, and I'm going to be very boring with the names here, and just name them after the class that they're going to be. Then we can click here to select our species and scroll through the species. Now if you're playing the physical game, of course you'll want to gather the character species card and the miniature corresponding to the character that you choose. So we're going to go ahead and create a human female rogue here with our first character. When gathering the class components on the physical game, you can look at the components ahead of time, including the action cards, in order to see which class you want to be, which one most appeals to you. So we'll go ahead and choose a rogue here, and we'll click finish, and then in TTS we'll hit the space bar to get back to our play area. And we'll see all of the components have been gathered for us here. So if you're playing the physical game, you'll want to, again, gather your species card as well as your miniature. For the chosen class, you'll want to gather the character class board, the starting attachment corresponding to that class, and all of the action cards corresponding to that class. Of course, there are 10 starting action cards that do not have a skill point cost on them. Those are available to you from the beginning of the campaign. And then starting classes, at the beginning of the campaign, you'll have 4 purchasable action cards available to you, and you'll see the skill point cost at the top right. So for the tutorial, we do not have any skill points yet, so we will just set these aside. And then you'll want to fill out a character sheet with the name of your character, the class of the character, species of the character, and then the campaign name. And that campaign name can be anything you want. The point is that it should match the campaign name that you fill out on your campaign sheet. And this is just so that if you're playing multiple campaigns with the same game box, you can keep track of which characters belong to which campaign. So you can go ahead and fill in a campaign name again, anything you want, your character names that are involved in this campaign, and then you are all set to begin your campaign. So now that your campaign and characters are set up, the next step is to turn to the tutorial mission. So if you're playing the physical game, just turn the mission books over to that tutorial mission. If you're playing in Tabletop Simulator, you'll click the Start Mission button, and then you'll see the tutorial here, and go ahead and click that, and the tutorial is opened up for you. Now we have some flavor introduction text that we can read now. And then we're told to look at the mission setup rules. So to set up a mission, first thing you're going to do is place tokens on the corresponding icons. On the tutorial mission, the only icon that needs a token is this orb icon here. So we're going to go ahead and place an orb token on that icon. And I'm just going to flip over to the next mission to show some other icons that we would use for token placement. So we see another orb icon here. And then we also see a treasure chest icon. So if we had a treasure chest icon, we would place a treasure token on it. You'll also notice that there are some adversary placement icons in this particular mission, although there weren't in the tutorial. These indicate which adversaries are present at the start of the mission. And in the mission text, you'll see a legend for what these icons correspond to, the Gralic Archer and Gralic Sentry. The number on the icons indicates how many characters those adversaries are present for. So in this case, because 2 is the minimum number of characters and 4 is the maximum, this Grallic Archer and this Grallic Sentry are always going to be present at the start of this mission. If you're playing only a 2-player campaign, then this Grallic Archer would not be placed, and if you're playing a 2 or 3 character campaign, then this Grallic Sentry would not be placed. If you're playing a 4-player campaign, then all 4 of them will be. When placing adversaries, it's important to keep the HP basis unique colors within an adversary type. So the 2 Grallic Archers should have different colored HP bases, and the 2 Grallic Sentries should have different colored HP bases. Across types, it's okay to share colors, so these 2 could both use a dark blue HP base. That's totally fine. It's just within an adversary type that the colored bases should be distributed evenly. So there are 4 different colors. If you only have 4 adversaries, they should all have a unique color. Once you place a 5th, just start distributing the colors evenly. Now we'll return to our tutorial mission, and our next step normally would be to create an event deck. But just for the tutorial mission, we do not use an event deck. But for all future missions, you'll create your event deck for the mission by shuffling the round 1 through 5 event deck and the round 6+ event deck separately, drawing 5 round 1 through 5 event cards and placing them on top of the 6+ deck. As you proceed through the campaign, more events will be added to these, and you will always use exactly 5 round 1 through 5 event cards placed on top of all of the available 6+ event cards. And that will create your event deck for the mission. All extra cards or all extra round 1 through 5 event cards can be placed aside or back in the game box. They will not be needed for that mission. This is all taken care of automatically in Tabletop Simulator, so if you are using TTS, you don't need to worry about setting up the event deck. Next up is to choose which equipment, attachments, and character action cards you'll be starting the mission with. So during the tutorial, of course, you only have the 1 attachment, and you'll probably want to have that equipped. In the future, you might have 3 or 4 attachments, and you can choose which 2 you want to have equipped at the start of the mission. Similarly, for equipment, you might have multiple pieces of equipment that could fit into one of the slots, but you'll choose which one to have equipped, or you might choose not to have any equipped at the start of the mission. And then you choose your character action cards for that mission. So at the start of the campaign, you have 10 character action cards available to you, and you are only allowed to bring exactly 10 character action cards into a mission. So for the tutorial, that's an easy choice. Once you've purchased some additional action cards and gained additional action cards, then you'll have to choose which 10 of the action cards available to you want to have available to you, or you want to have on that mission. Finally, you'll place your character miniatures on the entrance points. Each character should go on a different entrance points, and players can decide amongst themselves which entrance points they want to use. So I'm going to have a rogue and a ranger spread out here in each of the far corners. And once that's done, you can then proceed on to the mission start text before beginning the mission. Mission text tells us that we're going to be treating the doors as destructible objects that cannot be left over, so we need to learn a little bit about objects and doors. So there are 2 different kinds of objects present in Phantom Epoch. The first is destructible objects, indicated by a dark blue border, and the second is indestructible objects, indicated by a light blue border, as this orb is sitting on top of. Both kinds of objects cannot be moved through, and both kinds of objects, if a ranged attack has its line of sight drawn through them, they have a chance of blocking that ranged attack or causing the ranged attack to miss. And we'll see the mechanics for that a little bit later on. Destructible objects, as the name implies, can be destroyed. The first time a destructible object takes damage, whether it's 1 damage or 10, it doesn't matter. It has a damaged object token placed on it. And that doesn't change the mechanics of that object in any way, it just indicates that it has taken damage once. The second time a destructible object takes damage, instead a destroyed token is placed on top of it, and that indicates that that object is no longer there. This is now an empty space, with the caveat that it does have a yellow border, which indicates difficult terrain, and it will take 2 movement points to enter. But it no longer blocks line of sight, or no longer has the chance of blocking ranged attacks, and it no longer blocks movement. Now, that tells us indestructible objects, on the other hand, while they can be hit by attacks, particularly inadvertently by ranged attacks, they do not take any damage, and when they are hit by an attack, just nothing happens with that attack. Now, knowing that these doors are treated as destructible objects tells us that we are going to need to attack them twice, deal damage to them twice in order to destroy them and free ourselves from these rooms that we're currently in. Now, normally, doors can be opened by characters simply by moving on them, in which case you would place an open door token on it, indicating that that door is now opened. A closed door completely blocks line of sight. Line of sight and ranged attacks cannot be performed through a closed door. The door is treated as a wall. Adversaries cannot open doors either. Mission text always supersedes rules text, so in this case we won't worry about normal door treatment because these doors are going to be treated as destructible objects. Alright, next up in our mission text, we're instructed to begin with round 1. So the tutorial mission is very much so on rails, and we're going to be told exactly what to do for the first few rounds. And we're going to talk about the round flow, but first it's important to note that we are instructed that we're going to want to select 2 or more action cards with attack actions on them, and that's so that we can destroy these doors. We'll continue reading the mission text after any one character has destroyed the door adjacent to them. So for round flow, the very first thing you want to do at the start of a round is roll the decision die. That's handled automatically for us in Tabletop Simulator. You'll see that decision die is being rolled. If you're playing the physical game, go ahead and roll that now. And that's going to settle any ambiguity throughout the round. And we'll talk a little bit later about how that works once we encounter some potential ambiguity. Next up, on a normal mission, we would draw an event card from our prepared event deck. But on the tutorial, again, we were instructed that rather than drawing event cards, we're going to just act as if this mission event was active every round. So normally when drawing an event card, an event might refer to a mission event, in which case we would look at the mission text to see what the mission event is, and that would be in effect for the round. But just for the tutorial mission only, this mission event is in effect every round. So we will be re-rolling any critical strikes or fumbles rolled during the round. Next up, characters select their action cards for the round, or they choose to rest. We'll talk about resting a little bit later, but because we have no discarded action cards, resting isn't even an option at this point. So, as instructed, we're going to play a couple cards with attacks on them so that we can break down this door. The rogue's just going to go ahead and perform 1 card that has 2 attacks on it, and we'll have the ranger perform 2 separate attacks. And so we've selected our action cards for the round. Important to note, when selecting action cards, you can select as few or as many action cards as you want for the round, as long as their total AP value falls within your character's maximum AP. So for a human, that's 10. For a Growlic, it's 9. For a Slink, it's 11. And you'll note that with 2 AP, as indicated on the right-hand side of these action cards, the rogue is well within that 10 AP limit. And with 9 AP, our ranger is at exactly the 9 AP limit. So again, you can play as few or as many action cards as you want, as long as it's within that limit. Our rogue could throw in a few more cards, 3, 4 cards, and still be within that limit. But we have our 2 attacks primed for each character. So now if you're playing the physical game, you'll be revealing those cards to each other now, and then drawing adversary cards if an adversary was present. Again, that's all handled automatically by Tabletop Simulator. So we'll just go ahead and click Start Round. And then we'll see in Tabletop Simulator, our initiative is calculated automatically. But if you're playing the physical game, you'll want to look at the total AP values of your cards to determine your initiative. The Rogues is 2, the Rangers is 9. So our Rogue with the lower initiative is going to go before the Ranger. It is important to note that when selecting your cards for the round, when playing a multiplayer game, it's best to speak in generalities. Speak from the point of view of your character, so your characters know that they're going to try and break down the door in front of them, but your characters do not know that they're going to have 2 AP and perform 2 attacks with a -1 modifier on them. So consider it role-playing. Speak from the point of view of your character, and stick to avoiding exact values like that. So we've got our round ready to go. Our rogue with 2 initiative is going to go first, and it's going to perform its action card starting with an attack -1. And you'll notice in the rulebook we're told to look at key concepts, which contains that attack information. This is a melee attack because the target of the attack is the door adjacent to the rogue, 1 space away. Ranged attacks do have some extra rules, but we'll talk about those once we get to a ranged attack. Our rogue only has range 1 anyways. Our ranger does have a range of 5, but because the door is adjacent to the ranger, it will still be considered a melee attack. When a character performs an attack, they may choose which attack die they wish to use. At the start of the campaign, characters have 2 attack dice available to them, the blue basic attack die and the yellow blitz attack die. The basic attack die is low risk, low reward. It has 1 fumble face on it, and it has 1 critical strike face on it. The blitz attack die has 2 critical strike faces on it and 3 fumble faces on it, and overall higher values. Because we simply need to hit this door, I'm just going to play it safe and roll a basic attack die for my first attack. Now, to calculate the damage of this attack, we take the rolled value, 3, and add or subtract any modifiers on the attack to that. So we have a 3 minus 1, we do 2 damage to the door in front of us. And again, for destructible objects, which is what we're treating this door as, it doesn't matter the amount of damage done, we place a damage token on it. Now the rogue's going to perform her second attack, and we'll go ahead and roll that basic attack die again. I could choose to change to the blitz die now if I wanted, but again, I just need to do damage, and in this case I do 1 additional damage, and that door is now destroyed. Going to go ahead and discard this action card, and we're now told to continue reading. So we have some more flavor text here, and then you'll notice that the next 2 rounds are spelled out for us, but for now we should go ahead and complete round 1. So the rogue is done her turn, and it's important to note that if I had chosen multiple action cards, I have to complete them in their entirety or discard them before moving on to another action card. So if I had, for example, an action card with a movement on it, I wouldn't be able to do my first attack -1, move, and then return to do the second attack -1. I would have to complete the card in its entirety before moving on. However, the cards can be played in any order. So for our ranger, I'm going to go ahead and do a headshot first. And there is no modifier on the attack, so that's just a flat 3 damage to the door in front. And you'll recall this is adjacent to me, so even though I am a ranger and I have range 5, this is considered a melee attack, so I do 3 damage and I damage that door. Now with headshot, if the attack succeeds but a critical strike was not rolled, activate an available critical ability anyway. In this case, these critical abilities aren't really helpful to me because doing more damage to a door doesn't do anything. It doesn't matter the amount of damage that I do, it's just going to get that damage token on it. And doors or destructible objects cannot be inflicted with conditions, so my second critical ability isn't helpful either. And we'll talk a little bit more about those critical abilities later and how critical strikes work. But for now, I'm going to go ahead with my second attack, a snipe, and I'll go ahead with the basic attack die. And once again, I do 4 damage, and that door is destroyed. Now, if you are following along and you happen to roll either a critical strike or a fumble at this point in time, recall that our mission event is to re-roll any critical strikes or fumbles. So at this point in time of the tutorial, basically you're guaranteed to hit with these attacks because you would re-roll a fumble, and you don't need to worry about the critical abilities at this point in time because you would re-roll a critical strike as well. And that finishes our ranger's turn, and that finishes round 1. So at the end of a round, if there were adversaries present, you would discard their action cards and perform any end of round effects, which there aren't any right now. Often those do come from mission events, but again, we don't have to worry about that for the tutorial at this point in time. So in Tabletop Simulator, we're going to go ahead and click End Round, and we're going to be proceeding with round 2. So roll your decision die, done automatically in TTS, and if you're in TTS, click the Prep Adversaries button. If you're playing physically, that doesn't really matter because there are no adversaries present still at this point in time. Now we're told for round 2 that if we've already broken the door adjacent to us, which if we're following the instructions of the tutorial and we've played 2 attacks, that we all will have destroyed our doors, we should now take this opportunity to rest. So instead of selecting action cards at the start of a round, a character who has action cards in their discard pile could choose to rest instead, basically foregoing their turn for the round in order to recover their action cards. Now, when a character chooses to rest, they can, on that rest turn, swap out any attachments or equipment. If the attachments or equipment require Nova Cell charges, which again we'll talk about later, they can charge that equipment during a rest turn. If a character has detrimental conditions on them during a rest turn, they get to remove those detrimental conditions before they take effect, and they'll recover their action cards to their hand. A character who rests, their initiative counts as 1 for the round, so they will be considered as going first in the round, and at that point in time they'll perform all of those rest actions. So both characters are going to go ahead and rest as instructed, so we'll just click Start Round with no selected cards, and we'll see our initiative is 1. In the case of a tie in initiative between characters, the characters can decide between themselves who goes first. And it doesn't really matter since all they're doing is recovering their cards, and that is it for round 2. Now we're going to proceed with round 3, and our tutorial instructs us that with this round we're going to want to play cards with move actions on them or convert cards to movement with the goal of activating this orb. Now, to activate an orb token, a character simply needs to end their turn next to it. That's true also of retrieving treasures and of retrieving Nova Cells. In the case of that the orb, treasure, or Nova Cell is not on an indestructible object, players may also end their turn on that orb, treasure, or Nova Cell in order to activate or retrieve it. So in this case, we just want to end our turns adjacent to this orb in order to activate it, at which point in time we will continue reading in the mission text. Now, both characters require 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 movement points in order to get adjacent to the orb. So we're going to want to select action cards that allow us to move to gain 5 movement points. And that, again, is because the destroyed token takes 2 movement points to enter. So on our rogue, we're going to go ahead and do a move 4, and then we need 1 more, so we'll also do a move 2 that has the side effect of giving us invisible. Now on our Ranger, we're going to do something a little bit different. I don't want to use any of my move actions at this point in time, so instead I'm going to plan on converting an action card into movement in order to gain 5 movement points. Now, I need exactly 5 movement points, So I'm going to choose a card that has 5 AP. And when converting a card to movement, it gives the character exactly movement points equal to the AP value. So in this case, if I choose to convert this headshot into movement, I'll get 5 movement points. I don't need to decide at this point in time when I'm selecting the card whether I'm actually going to do that or not. If my turn rolls around and things have changed and I want to actually use the headshot as an attack, I will be free to do so. But for now, I'm just going to plan that when the ranger's turn comes, I'll be converting it to a 5 move. You can convert as many action cards as you want during a turn into movement, so if I threw a couple more cards out there, I could convert them into movement as well. Now, action cards can also be converted into attacks with a base value of 0, though as a Growlic, I would add +1 to any converted attacks. Now, unlike movement, where converted cards, you can convert as many cards as you want into movement during a turn, if you're converting an action card into an attack, that must be the only attack performed during the turn. So I couldn't, for example, have these two cards out and decide I want to convert reposition into an attack and still perform my headshot attack. Because if I'm converting a card into an attack, again, that must be the only attack performed on my turn. So I've selected my action cards with movement on them for the round as instructed. I'm going to go ahead and start the round, and both characters have 5 AP again. So again, in the case of a tie, characters choose who they want to go first. And I'm going to go ahead and have my ranger move first. So my ranger is going to convert headshot into a movement equal to 5 movement points and go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's my only action card, so my turn is ended, and I'm going to go ahead and flip the orb, indicating that I've activated it. And now we can continue reading in the mission book. And we have some more flavor text here, and then we're told that we're going to place our first adversary. So we're instructed in the tutorial only, specifically to use a light blue HP tracking base for the adversary. Normally, you are not instructed which colored HP tracking base to use, and it doesn't matter which you use as long as you distribute them evenly. So if you have 4 adversaries of the same type, again, they should each have a unique colored HP tracking base, but the order that you place them does not matter. The numbers at the top indicate how many characters must be present to place that adversary, and because the minimum number of characters is 2 and maximum is 4 for the tutorial, we will be placing this adversary no matter what. The letter and number at the bottom are the coordinates at which to place the adversary. So if you're playing the physical game now, you'll want to gather the Slink Archer description card, a standee with the tracking base, the Slink action deck, and the Archer action deck. In Tabletop Simulator, we're just going to click Spawn Adversary. We're going to click the icon corresponding to that adversary, which is this one. But before I do so, note that you can change the difficulty tier of the adversaries here in Tabletop Simulator, but because our mission is a difficulty 1, we're just going to keep that as 1 star. If I wanted more of a challenge, I could choose to place a higher difficulty adversary, but for our tutorial, we'll keep things nice and simple. So that gathered the description card and action cards automatically for me. Now I'm going to find the light blue archer. And if you're playing the physical game, make sure that you set the HP tracking base for the standee to 5 HP, and then place it on the board. And notice the coordinates were L4, so we look for L along the bottom, and then we go up to row 4, and our archer gets placed right there. Normally, when placing new adversaries, they do not get to act within the turn that they were placed. They don't draw action cards until the following round, but again, mission text supersedes regular rules text, and we are instructed just for this tutorial that this adversary, the Slink Archer, is going to go right away. And normally adversaries would draw action cards at random, but for the tutorial we're instructed to specifically draw these 2 action cards. So the Tactical Retreat Slink Species card and a archer class card that has the light blue fire arrows on it. So let's go ahead and draw those cards. So we got our tactical retreat, shuffle the rest back in, and then we got our light blue fire arrows card as indicated in the mission text graphics. So we're going to go ahead with the Slink Archer's turn now. For adversary turns, the very first thing that they need to do is select a primary target. Now the primary target is going to be a prioritized list starting with the closest enemy within range, and if we look at our description card here for the Archer, her range is 5. So she does have an enemy within range. The Ranger is only 3 range away. If there were no enemies in range, then the next primary target would be the enemy that the adversary could get within range of using the fewest movement points possible. However, if it's not possible for the adversary to move within range of an enemy, which would be the case with this setup because these objects are blocking the path, and even if she moved one forward, both enemies would be 6 range away outside of range, then the primary target becomes the destructible object that, if it were destroyed, would create a path to the closest enemy using the fewest MP possible. And there are some additional tiebreakers because there are 4 possible destructible objects here, and we won't go into all of them. Those are spelled out in a flowchart in the rulebook, but ultimately the decision die in this case would decide which of the 4 objects was selected, because destroying any of these 4 would create a opportunity to get within range of an enemy using the same amount of movement points. So because objects do not have HP basis, so they don't have a color, we ignore the color of this decision die, and we move on to the primary direction, which is south. So in this case, we would choose the southernmost object as the primary target, and that would become the primary target for the archer's turn. However, the archer does have an enemy in range, so the primary target again is just the closest enemy in range. The primary target is therefore the ranger. After selecting a primary target, adversaries perform their species action card first, and then their class action card, and these are performed in isolation. So first of all, the Slink Archer is going to do a tactical retreat, which you'll notice has this round effect on it, the R in a circle. That indicates that for the entirety of the round in which this card is active, the Slink Archer has guard +2. And that's modified from the base guard of -1. So for this round, the Slink Archer is going to have a guard value of 1. Then in addition, if an enemy is within range, within the Slink's range at the start of the Slink's turn, it will perform a retreat 2 at the end of its turn. So we'll keep that in mind as we now move on to the class action card. Now the class action card has the 4 colors on it corresponding to the different HP base colors. Of course, we only have a light blue archer present, so we only care about the light blue color at this point in time. So the Slink Archer will be performing fire arrows, which says if the primary target is an enemy in range, which it is as we just determined, roll the accuracy die. If a success or block is rolled, the target is inflicted with burning. So let's go ahead and roll that accuracy die. And a success was rolled, so our ranger is going to be inflicted with burning. Now, if you're playing the physical game on characters, the conditions active on a character could be rested on the mini itself, or it could be placed on your character class board. That's just a matter of personal preference. For adversaries, you'll notice that their standee base has extra slots in it that can hold these condition tokens so that you can see directly on the adversary standee what conditions are active on it. So our ranger is now burning, and you can refer to the conditions definitions to see what the effect of that is. In this case, burning figures with this condition token take 3 damage at the start of their next non-rest turn and then remove the token. So our ranger is going to take 3 damage at the start of its next turn due to that burning. And then finally, we return the Slink Archer has completed its class action card, so we return to this effect, the Retreat 2 at the end of the Slink's turn. With a retreat, an adversary just wants to get as far away as possible from their primary target, in this case, the Ranger. But because these objects are in the way, even if the Archer were to move 1 space here, it's still exactly 3 range away from the Ranger, so it cannot create any more space and therefore just stays where it is with that retreat. So the adversary's turn is completed. Now we're going to move on to the rogue, who has 2 action cards available, a sprint with move 4 and into the shadows with move 2. So I'm going to go ahead and perform the sprint first, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'll use the move 2 to get 1 space closer and gain invisibility. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that invisible token on myself. So now the Slink Archer will not be able to target the rogue as long as I remain invisible. We'll notice here that the Slink Archer is completely protected by these objects. So I only moved 1 with my move 2 because there's no way I could get any closer to the Slink Archer in order to attack. I'm either going to have to leap over these objects, which we'll demonstrate shortly, either destroy one of the destructible objects to open a path, or use ranged attacks to attack this Slink Archer in order to defeat it. So that brings us to the end of the round, and we will discard the action cards for the Slink Archer. Now, starting a new round, we'll go ahead and roll the decision die. And notice we do have a new mission event now that we've reached this stage of the rulebook. So we're no longer going to be re-rolling any critical strikes or fumbles, but instead each character rolls the basic attack die and performs a heal X self, where X is equal to the value rolled. Fumbles are treated as 0, and critical strikes are treated as 3. Now, none of us have taken damage yet, though the Ranger is likely about to from that burning. But whenever a character receives or recovers HP from a heal action, the character receives a bandage. So let's just pretend that we did roll this and the rogue recovered some HP. The rogue would receive a bandage. Now, our starting classes have 2 bandage slots on their character class board. Once both those slots are full, heal actions will no longer affect that character. There are ways to remove bandages that are gained throughout the campaign, and right off the bat, the healer does have ways of removing bandages. But as of right now, for these 2 characters, if these bandage slots get filled up, they will no longer be able to be affected by heals. Now, as we're selecting our cards for this new round, I'll be keeping in mind that the rogue only has range 1, so we'll want to get adjacent to the archer to attack it. So I'm going to play a leap card, and we'll demonstrate what that does. And then because I'm invisible, I'll probably also play a sneak attack. Now, some character action cards have either temporary effects, as indicated by the clock-like icon, or persistent effects, as indicated by the infinity icon. Temporary effects last until the start of that character's following turn. So if the Ranger were to play evasive maneuvers, they would place the card next to the temporary section on their class board, and that would indicate that they have guard +2 until the start of their following turn. Persistent effects last until the end of the mission, until some condition on the card is satisfied according to the description of the action, or until they choose to discard that persistent effect. So if the Ranger were to play Take Cover, they would place the card next to the persistent section of their class board. For the Ranger, I'm just going to go ahead and play a low AP card, hopefully guaranteeing that I go first, and I'll plan on converting that into a ranged attack. The Adversaries cards are then drawn after we've revealed our cards, and we click Start Round in Tabletop Simulator to reveal the Adversaries cards. So initiative again is calculated automatically. Our Ranger is going to go first at 2, but if you're playing a physical game, you'll as usual, add up your AP values, and you'll look at the Slink Archer, the light blue one. 4 plus 3, the Slink Archer goes at 7 initiative, so after the Ranger and before the Rogue at 8. Now the Ranger is going to go first and is going to convert this attack, or convert this card into an attack, and as a Growlic, it does gain +1 to this attack. So if I had played other cards, this would still be the only attack I'm allowed to perform on the turn because I'm converting it into an attack. Now, before any of that, though, at the start of my turn, because I have the burning token, I immediately take the 3 damage from burning, and then I remove burning. So in Tabletop Simulator, you can just adjust the health bar, and in the physical game, you'll adjust your mini on the HP tracking base and reduce its HP by 3. Now for a ranged attack, the enemy has to be within my range. As the Ranger, I do have 5 range base on my attacks, and the Archer is only 3 spaces away, so that is well within my range. In addition, in order to perform a ranged attack, line of sight needs to be drawn to the enemy. Now, line of sight is a literal line that goes from any one vertex of the attacker's space to any different vertex of the target space. So I can draw to any of these vertexes, but I could not draw from bottom right corner or bottom right vertex to bottom right vertex. There's no reason I would need to in this particular case, but it has to be drawn to a different vertex. Now, for every object or figure on the line of sight that is not adjacent to the attacker will need to roll the accuracy die to determine whether they thread the needle past that object and figure. In this case, I'm going to draw my line of sight straight through one object that is adjacent to me. So because it's adjacent to me, I'm taking cover behind it, I'm peeking around it for this attack, and I don't need to worry about the accuracy die. So I'm going to go ahead and roll my attack. This is a +1. And I rolled a 4, so with the +1 it becomes 5, and then the Archer's guard is -1. So after getting my calculating my attack value, I then subtract the guard value, which is a negative value. So 5 minus -1 becomes 6 damage, and the Archer is defeated. But just for the purpose of demonstrating further rules, I'm going to go ahead and pretend that I actually rolled a fumble. So a fumble means not only that my current attack misses, but if I did have other attack actions available to me on that turn, I'm so off balance after fumbling that I cannot perform any additional attacks either. So we're going to pretend that my attack just missed entirely. Now we're going to move on to the Slink Archer's turn. And again, selecting primary target first, the Slink Archer only has one possible target within range, which is the Ranger, because the Rogue is invisible. So the primary target is going to be the Ranger. Now, pretending for a moment that the Rogue was not invisible, both targets would be equally viable because they're both 3 range away and both within range, so we would go to the decision die, which is light blue. So the light blue Ranger would still become the primary target. We move on to the species action card next, and it has a move on it. Now, the main thing to keep in mind whenever an adversary has a move or a leap action is they want to take advantage of their range. So their primary goal is going to be to get to exactly their maximum range from their primary target. Now there are additional tiebreakers to determine exactly what space, such as not moving through hazards, not landing in hazards, getting additional enemies in range if possible while maintaining maximum range to the primary target, and the decision die as well. So in this case, again, the Archer is at 3 range already, and even moving here, it's still at 3 range, so there's no way it can get closer to its 5 range maximum. So instead, it's just not going to move at all. And then we're told that the Slink gains invisible at the end of the turn. So we'll refer back to that after we're done the class action card, which is an attack -1 for the light blue Archer. So the Archer now, this time, it's going to have to draw a line of sight through objects. So when an adversary is drawing line of sight, it wants to draw it through as few objects and figures as possible. In the event of a tie, where in this case we could go through an indestructible object or a destructible object, it will prefer to draw through the destructible object. If it had friendly figures also on the line of sight, it would, in the case of a tie, it would want to go through the fewest objects and figures possible and then avoid hitting or going through its allies. But friendly fire certainly is a possibility and something to be aware of both as characters and to take advantage of when you have ranged allies on the mission. So this Slink Archer is going to draw a line of sight through the destructible object. The first thing it does is roll its blue basic attack die. Adversaries always use the blue basic attack die. It's 3. It rolled a 3 base. It's an attack -1, so that's 2. But then the archer's base attack value is 3, so that's a 5 attack value roll. But now, because there is an object on that line of sight, we're going to roll the accuracy die for that object. And that result is a miss. So the attack misses entirely. Now, other possible results are a blocked. So that would mean that the attack hits the destructible object that was being rolled for that 5 damage instead of hitting the target. Could also roll a success, which means the archer successfully threaded the needle past that object and hits the ranger. Now again, if there are multiple objects or figures on the line of sight, first of all, you roll the accuracy die for each one in the order they appear on the line of sight. So if a success is rolled for the first object, then you move on to rolling for the second object. Now moving on, now that the Slink's attack is performed, the next part of its class action is a retreat 2, and once again it cannot get any further from the ranger, its primary target, so it will just stay put. But now going back to the species card, we were instructed to give the Slink invisible at the end of its turn. So we'll drop an invisible token on the Slink. And as always, when playing a more powerful turn with higher AP, there's a chance that your plans are going to go awry, as is the case for the rogue right now. So I'm going to go ahead and use my leap 4 to get in here next to the archer. But I will not be able to perform my sneak attack because my only target now is invisible. So I'm going to just go ahead and actually I might go ahead and go on a little bit of a rampage here and attack this object right here. So my attack value is 4. Because I'm invisible, it's ×2, and I end up doing 8 damage to that object. But again, as an object, all that means is it gets a damage token placed on it. And that is it for the round. So the adversary cards get discarded now. Any end of round effects take place. And now we're going to start a new round. So we'll prepare a round, we'll roll the decision die. On a regular mission, we'd draw the event. But right now, for the tutorial, we have this mission event, and this turn, it is going to matter because our ranger took some damage from burning. So our ranger is going to go ahead, roll the basic attack die, and heal for the value rolled. So our ranger healed for 4, only actually needed 3 HP. But we'll go into 3 and restore ourselves to full HP. And because the ranger recovered HP from a heal action, our ranger receives a bandage. Now, when a character has invisible, it either removes invisibility after the end of its next full turn after receiving invisibility, or after performing an attack. So our rogue did perform a sneak attack, so invisible should be removed from the rogue. Unfortunately, the Slink Archer is still invisible because it has not had a full turn since gaining invisibility. So as we start a new round, here we're going to keep that in mind, and we're probably going to try and go late, hoping that the Slink Archer goes before us and loses that invisibility. So let's play a few high AP attacks, maxing out the rogue's AP at 10, and we'll do something similar on our ranger. Alright, so both characters are maxed out on AP. We'll go ahead and start the round, and our Slink Archer is going to go first at 6. So once again, selecting primary target, closest enemy within range is the rogue. We're going to do a move 5, and again the goal is to be at exactly range 5 from the primary target. However, the archer is still blocked in by these objects and cannot actually get any further from the rogue, so will not move. Finally, it has a triple shot, which is an attack -2 against 3 different targets. There are, of course, only 2 enemies here, so it will do 2 attacks, starting with the primary target. So it's adjacent, it's considered a melee attack, does not need line of sight, obviously is within range. It rolls a 4, -2 is 2, and then with the base attack value, an additional 3. So 5 damage to our rogue, a pretty hefty attack there. And now because the archer has performed an attack, invisible is removed, but its turn is not over yet, so it proceeds with triple shot, choosing its next target as if the primary target was no longer on the board. So its next target then, of course, becomes the ranger, and it will want to draw line of sight through, once again, as few objects and figures as possible. So we'll draw a line of sight, something like this, going through just the one destructible object. Now, once again, adjacent figures and objects do not require an accuracy die roll, so it could draw a line of sight like this, and it would still only roll the 1 accuracy die for the destructible object here. So we'll go ahead and roll that now. And let's, for demonstration purposes, pretend this was a critical strike. So let's go ahead with that. So critical strikes have a number of benefits. So first of all, on a ranged attack, a critical strike negates the need of rolling the accuracy die. So the archer successfully hits the ranger and does not need to roll an accuracy die for the object. It also pierces all guard, positive guard, that the target has. So if my ranger had had, say, 2 guard, that would be completely ignored by a critical strike. Now, in the case of targets that have negative guard values, like the archer itself, the negative guard value is still calculated and additional damage is done, even on a critical strike. It's just positive guard value is pierced to a minimum of 0. Now, in addition, critical strikes also activate a critical ability, and for adversaries, we see on their description card that means at the end of the current turn, the Slink Archer is going to perform a retreat 3 and a heal 2 to itself. For characters have critical abilities on their class action board and also on their starting attachments as well. And when a character rolls a critical strike, they can choose which of these 2 abilities to activate. They do not both activate, they choose which one activates. So with this critical strike, the Slink Archer did 3 damage, -2, 1, and then with its base value of 3, does 4 damage to my poor ranger. And that's it for the Slink Archer's turn now, as there is not a third target present. Now we move on to the ranger, who is right away going to get revenge, and I'm going to go ahead and use a piercing shot. I'm going to draw a line of sight like this so I avoid going through my friend, the rogue, and the only object I'm going through is adjacent to me, so I don't have to worry about the decision die. I rolled a 4. The Slink Archer's guard is -1, so that becomes 5 damage. And I did have Pierce on the attack, but because it was a negative guard value, the Pierce really has no effect. It only has an effect if there's a positive guard value. So I do 5 damage, and the archer is finally defeated. Now, a couple other modifiers on action cards, if we had made it to the rogue's turn. Inflict bleeding, a condition. So when an attack has a condition modifier on it, the condition is only applied if the attack is successful. And an attack is defined as successful if the attack value exceeds the target's guard value. So in the case of Serrated Edge, I would need to, pretty much as the rogue, against a target that has a negative guard value, I would need to do anything but fumble, and it would succeed and inflict that bleeding. Now, the adversary is defeated, so we're going to remove it from the board, and in the place where it was defeated, we place a number of Nova cells equal to the difficulty tier of the adversary. So we're using a tier 1 adversary here. If I had decided to go for a bit more of a challenge and use a tier 2 adversary, I would be placing 2 Nova cells in this spot. In order to pick up that Nova Cell, a character needs to end its turn adjacent to the Nova Cell or on top of it. And we have completed our mission now. Stop reading until the Slink Archer is defeated, but we do have until the end of the current round before the mission ends, so we're going to go ahead and end the Archer or the Ranger's turn. We're going to move on to the Rogue's turn. And we're just going to sit in this spot so that we can go ahead and pick up that Nova Cell before the mission ends. And with that, we end our round successful. So before we talk about mission success, we'll talk about if things had gone south. Character defeat and mission result failure. So anytime a character's HP is reduced to 0, that character is defeated. It's removed from the board and can no longer participate in the mission. Any remaining characters can try and complete the mission without the defeated characters. And even if a character is defeated and the mission does end up being successful, the defeated characters will gain the rewards from the mission. In the event that all characters are defeated or an objective, required objective, is not met, the mission is a failure, and the mission will need to be re-attempted in order to succeed. Now, even on a mission failure, there's a number of activities that can be performed between missions, and we'll go into those shortly, and these take place both on successful and failed missions. So you do have an opportunity to power up a little bit after failing a mission. You might even choose to go to another mission before re-attempting the mission, and come back when you're a little bit stronger and better prepared for the mission that was just failed. Now that we've defeated the archer, we can continue reading our flavor text and go on to mission success and rewards. So we'll look at the rewards box, and we see that each character gains 1 skill point, and we also unlock a new mission, Burkev 1. So if you're playing the physical game right now, you can go ahead and update your character sheets to include that 1 skill point, and go ahead and put a check mark in Burkev 1's available box on the campaign sheet. Now, when completing a mission, the tutorial does not show up on the campaign sheet, but normally when completing a mission, you might choose, if optional objectives weren't completed and you feel like you might want to retry that mission to complete the optional objectives and see what can be unlocked or what rewards you gain from doing so, you might want to mark completed with an X. And if you've completed all optional objectives, you might want to mark it with a check mark, just so you know that you've already done everything on that mission, or there might be something else for you to do there. After mission success, all characters are mission success or failure between missions. All characters are restored to full HP. Any conditions on them are removed. They recover all of their discarded cards, and they remove any bandages that they currently have on them. Now, on Tabletop Simulator, we don't need to mark the character sheet or the campaign sheet. We just simply click End Mission. We choose whether we succeeded or failed, and whether we succeeded with all optional objectives or didn't complete all optional objectives. In this case, there were no optional objectives on the tutorial, so we'll just go ahead and put that yes, we did. And we'll click OK, and you'll see that we gain the skill point automatically Burkev 1 was unlocked automatically. And then we also receive attachment rewards. So if you're playing the physical game, you'll draw these attachment rewards manually. In Tabletop Simulator, they're drawn automatically. Now, the way attachment rewards work is there are 3 different tiers of attachment decks. 2 of them are shown in TTS at the moment. After completing a mission successfully, you'll look at the difficulty of the mission. In this case, the tutorial is difficulty tier 1. And then you'll draw 4 attachment cards from the corresponding attachment tier, so tier 1 in this case, and any tiers below it. So if this mission was difficulty 2, we would draw 4 tier 2 attachments as well as 4 tier 1 attachments. But because it's difficulty 1, we just draw the 4 tier 1 attachments. And then each character chooses 1 attachment to keep. Now, there are broken attachments dispersed throughout the attachment decks. If a character were to choose one of these, they simply, in this case, gain 1 Nova Cell and then return the attachment to its decks. A couple things to notice about attachments is, first of all, the type icon. At the top right, you'll notice that one of these has them, the other 2 don't. If an attachment does not have a type icon, then there is no restriction in using it. If it does have a type icon, then in order to use it, the character must have the corresponding icon in an attachment slot on their character class board. In this case, the only one of these 2 characters that can use the sharpened edge is the rogue, so the rogue is going to go ahead and take that one. And then we'll have the ranger take the adhesive grip. Any unselected attachments are shuffled back into the attachment tier decks that they came from. And in Tabletop Simulator, we can just click Finish Rewards to do that automatically. Now on attachment cards, you'll notice that some of them have a slot at the top left that has a number in it. Now that means that that attachment requires a Nova Cell charge in order to have any effect. So to charge an attachment that requires a Nova Cell charge, you simply place one of your Nova Cell tokens on that slot, and you can do this between missions or on rest turns during missions. Now these attachments will have a trigger associated with them. This trigger might be manual in red, or it might be auto in blue. Now a manual trigger means that anytime this condition occurs, the character can choose to deplete, to lose that Nova Cell in order to trigger the effect. In this case, if the character is about to perform an attack, it can choose to spend that Nova Cell to add Pierce 4 to the attack. In the case of an auto trigger, if the trigger condition occurs, the Nova Cell, if the attachment is charged, the Nova Cell is automatically spent and the effect automatically occurs. Between missions, there's a number of activities that players can perform, although these are somewhat limited after the tutorial mission. After the tutorial mission, really the only thing that there is to do, if you so desire, is to spend the skill point that you earned. So each starting class has 4 purchasable action cards available to it, each with a different skill point cost, so we could purchase the 1 skill point action card if we desired, or we might choose just to save these for later. If we do purchase it, we just reduce our available skill points on our character sheet by the corresponding skill point cost found at the top right of the card, and that card becomes available to us. Now keep in mind, if you do purchase action cards, that you may still only bring 10 action cards into any given mission, so if you do purchase an action card and you have 11 cards available to you, you'll need to choose 1 action card to leave behind on the following mission. With the tutorial all wrapped up, you'll want to proceed to the next mission, which is Burkev 1. So in Tabletop Simulator, you can simply click Start Mission, make sure Burkev is selected, and then choose 1 to load the first mission, and you'll notice that the event deck is created automatically in this case. We can also clear our play area from the previous mission to get rid of all of the tokens and the adversaries that were used. Now there's a known bug in Tabletop Simulator because of selecting some of the action cards manually. When the Slink Archer first appeared, you'll need to delete those manually. Berkev 1 does introduce a couple of new rules, so we'll talk about these very briefly. First of all, hazards. So spaces with a red border around them are considered hazard spaces and have different effects when entered. There are trap hazards, fire hazards, and poison hazards. These, in this particular case, these are fire hazards, meaning that when entered, a figure takes 3 damage immediately and then is inflicted by burning. Next up, this is the first mission after the tutorial, so from here on out you will be using an event deck and drawing an event at the start of each round after rolling the decision die, so make sure when you play Berkev 1 to set up that event deck as was done automatically in Tabletop Simulator. And then there are lava and water spaces present on this particular mission, so notice the dark black dotted border around some of these lava spaces. That indicates that these spaces cannot be entered. However, they can be leapt over, and line of sight can be drawn through them without any penalty or without any need to roll the accuracy die. And there's also this extras reference. So you'll notice the orb icon has a number 1 next to it. So that indicates that this is actually an optional objective to activate this orb. If it is activated, you will refer to the extras booklet and look up number 1 to see what the effect of activating that orb is. Now, after completing Berkev 1, you'll have a few more between mission activities available to you. One of these is expeditions. So there are 3 planetary expedition decks corresponding to the planets that your missions will take place on and around. So after completing a Berkev mission, you will have the option of drawing an expedition from the Berkev expedition deck. To do so, you shuffle the deck and then draw one expedition at random. Read the flavor text, and then come to a decision point. Now, if this 3 meeple icon is present at the top right of the expedition, that means that it is a team choice. All the players need to come to a consensus on which option they're going to choose. If the single meeple icon is present, that means that each character may select a different option. Once everyone's decided, you'll flip the expedition over and read the results of any option that was selected. The results will tell you whether you shuffle the expedition back into the planetary expedition deck, or whether you discard it and remove it for the remainder of the campaign. Now, some missions, and Berkev 1 is one of these missions, instruct you to perform a story expedition instead of a planetary expedition. So after completing Berkev 1, instead of drawing a Berkev expedition, you will be performing a story expedition, which function in much the same way. The main difference is you will not shuffle the story expedition deck, and you will always be told exactly what number expedition you should draw at any given time. If you are instructed to perform a story expedition, you do not do a planetary expedition as well. You simply do the story expedition. The next time you complete or even fail a mission on that planet, you can then do a planetary expedition. Also, between missions, players are able to shop for equipment. Now, equipment is different and unique to each planet that you will visit. And it comes in 3 tiers on each of the planets. So at the beginning of the campaign, you will only have Tier 1 equipment available to you. After completing Berkev 1, you can shop from the Tier 1 Berkev equipment deck. Now, if you look on your campaign sheet, you'll notice that there is a fame tracker that is unique to each planet. As you proceed through the campaign, you will gain fame in various ways, frequently from expeditions. And as you increase in fame, you'll unlock the further tiers of equipment. So if you gain 5 fame on Berkev, you will then have access to Tier 2 equipment on Berkev. If you gain 10 fame on Berkev, you will then have access to Tier 3 equipment on Berkev. The start of the campaign, you will have 0 fame, so you will only be able to access Tier 1 equipment. And in order to do this, we can, in Tabletop Simulator, we can simply click Start Shopping, and the correct equipment will be drawn automatically. Now, talking about equipment cards briefly, they function much the same way as attachments. You'll notice that some of them have a Nova Cell slot at the top right, so just like attachments, these need to be charged with Nova Cells in order for the effect to occur. And just like attachments, they can only be recharged between missions or during a rest turn. They also have manual or auto triggers. In this case, as we can see, all of these ones present have automatic triggers. So that means whenever the trigger occurs and the piece of equipment is charged and the equipment is equipped, the Nova Cell will automatically be depleted and the effect will take place. Now, many of them do not have a Nova Cell charge slot, which means that the effect is always in effect, but oftentimes this comes at a detriment. So we'll notice on these Baranium Sabatons that they have a move -1, so that means anytime a character with these equipped performs a move action, they will gain 1 less movement point. Now, equipment can be equipped and unequipped on rest turns and between missions, so you'll probably want to be strategic in what equipment you're wearing at any given time. Similarly, some have attack -1, so any attacks performed while wearing this Baranium Horn Helm will have 1 attack value subtracted from them, but the effects are always in effect. Some equipment, such as this Baranium Reinforced Breastplate, have initiative +1, so when determining initiative at the start of a round, a character with this breastplate equipped will add 1 to their initiative. Now, the Nova Cell icon in the middle of the cards indicate how much these cost to purchase, and in order to purchase them, the players simply return that number of Nova Cells to the general supply and place the equipment in their play area. Characters can freely swap attachments, Nova Cells, and equipment between themselves, with the exception, of course, of the starting attachments, which, as shown by the emblem at the top right, are unique to the class that they belong to. Between missions, characters also have the opportunity to upgrade the Phantom Epoch, which is the starship that serves as their headquarters. So looking at the starship board, we can see that each room has different requirements in order to upgrade it, and many of them, 3 of them, require the vanished technology, or in differing amounts to upgrade. So as you proceed through the campaign, you will earn vanished technology that is kept track of on your campaign sheet. So if, for example, you had 3 vanished technology and you wanted to unlock the laboratory, you would go ahead and spend that 3 vanished technology and put a check mark next to the 3 vanished technology. These rooms also require either schematics, equipment, or advanced simulations. These are all things that are found or can be found throughout the course of the campaign. Once found, the corresponding checkbox can be checked off. Now, in Tabletop Simulator, once both checkboxes are checked, the room is automatically going to upgrade. If you're playing the physical campaign, once you've unlocked or once you've checked both boxes, you can pull out the top layer for that room of the dual layered punch board, and beneath it you will find the rewards text of what you gain from upgrading or unlocking that room. In Tabletop Simulator, any boxes or bags that are referred to by that text can be found directly within the room. Simply click on the room and drag away from it to pull the corresponding components out. On certain missions in Phantom Epoch, you will encounter boss adversaries. So if you're playing on Tabletop Simulator, similar to regular adversaries, you'll click the Spawn Adversary button, and then you'll go over to the Bosses tab. And make sure that the number at the bottom here corresponds to the number of characters present. This should be selected automatically, but it doesn't hurt to be safe. You can click it to change it if need be, and then click on the boss adversary that you're instructed to place, and that will automatically gather the boss board, the boss action cards, and the boss standee. If you're playing a physical game, you'll need to, of course, gather these for yourself. Now, boss adversaries have different attributes depending on the number of characters present. In this particular example, we have 2 characters present, so our mutant Growlick here will use the left column with 23 HP, 2 base attack, 1 guard, and 1 range as his attributes. And you can see that Tabletop Simulator has set those attributes automatically accordingly. Boss adversaries have various actions that appear on their boss description board. They have 1 inherent action that they perform on each and every turn, and then they have 3 additional numbered actions that they will perform according to the boss adversary action card that is drawn. So unlike regular adversaries that use a species and class deck, bosses only draw from the boss action card deck at the start of the round. And that action card is going to tell you which action the boss performs. So in this particular case, since we drew an action number 1, the boss's initiative for the round is going to be its inherent action's AP value 2, as well as action number 1's AP value 3. So it will have an initiative of 5. Now, some action cards might refer to multiple actions, in which case the actions are performed in the order they appear on the card, and the initiative is the total of all of the actions listed, as well as the inherent action. When the Mutant Krallick's turn rolls around, it will perform the inherent action first, and then will perform any actions on its action card. Now, some boss action cards have a persistent icon on them. Those cards will inform you what the effect is for that card, and then you will place that card next to the persistent marker on the boss description board, indicating that that is always in effect. Boss adversaries, just like regular adversaries, have a critical ability that is activated whenever they roll a critical strike. When a boss adversary is defeated, they drop a number of Nova Cells that's equal to the number of characters present, and that does include characters who have been defeated during the course of the mission, plus the difficulty tier of the mission. So on a difficulty tier 1 mission with 2 characters present, the Mutant Krallick would drop 3 Nova Cells once defeated.